Garrick Ironvale thought his granddaughter was thriving in an elite boarding school under her aunt's care. For 18 years, he sent $2 million to ensure Melissa wanted for nothing. But when his trackers found the 18-year-old sleeping on a metal cot in a state-run shelter wearing donated rags, Garrick asked one question that made Sophia's soul tremble. Where is every cent of the $2 million I sent for my blood? If you've ever wondered how greed can corrupt even family bonds, this story will chill you to the bone. This is about betrayal, stolen legacies, and an immortal grandfather's fight to reclaim the future his daughter died protecting. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section what time it is and where you are watching from. And remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now, let's continue. Garrick Ironvale stood in the shadows of his ancestral study in the Ironvale estate, surrounded by tapestries that had witnessed 5 centuries of history. At over 500 years old, he had built a fortune worth billions through strategic investments that span generations. His influence reached into every major city across the globe, a testament to patience and immortal vision. But on this frozen December evening, none of that mattered. Garrick's fingers hovered over the glossy photograph that had been slid across his desk minutes earlier by Victor, his most trusted investigator. The image showed a crowded soup kitchen somewhere in the city, volunteers ladling broth into plastic bowls while a line of hollow-eyed people waited their turn. But Garrick's attention had locked onto one figure in the background, a young woman hunched over a table in the corner, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. It wasn't her posture that stopped his breath. It wasn't even the threadbare jacket or the way she clutched a paper cup with both hands, as if afraid someone might steal it. It was the pendant. Even in the grainy photograph, even half hidden beneath the collar of her donated clothing, the silver gleamed with an unmistakable luster. Garrick would recognize it anywhere. He had commissioned it himself 19 years ago, had clasped it around his daughter Lauren's neck the day she married that human man against his counsel. The Ironvale crest, no larger than a thumbprint, wrought in ancestral silver that only their bloodline could wear without burning. When was this taken? His voice came out rougher than intended. Victor shifted his weight. 4 days ago. St. Catherine's Community Kitchen on Halsted Street. She's been going there twice a week for the past 6 months, according to the staff. 6 months. Garrick's jaw tightened. While he had been reviewing quarterly reports from the trust administrator, signing off on another year of tuition payments to Ashford Academy, his granddaughter had been standing in food lines. He pulled the photograph closer, studying every detail with the precision that had kept him alive through 5 centuries. The girl's hands were raw and reddened, her nails bitten down to the quick. There was a bruise on her cheekbone, partially hidden by her hair. And those eyes, when he looked closely, he could see them staring down at the table with an expression that sent rage coursing through his ancient veins. They were Lauren's eyes, his daughter's eyes, the same defiant spark dulled by exhaustion and hunger. The boarding school? Garrick asked, though he already knew the answer. Hasn't existed for 7 years. The building was demolished in 2016, turned into a parking lot. Victor placed another folder on the desk. The bank statements show the money still being transferred monthly to an account under Sophia Martinez's name. All $2 million over 18 years accounted for in the ledger. But none of it went to Melissa's care. Garrick stood slowly, the movement deliberate and controlled despite the fury building in his chest. He had trusted Sophia, had believed that keeping his distance, honoring the boundaries between his world and theirs, was the right choice, had convinced himself that money would be enough to protect his blood. He had been a fool. Find her, he said quietly, still staring at the photograph. Find Melissa tonight, and find out exactly where Sophia is right now. The memory came to Garrick unbidden as he stared at the photograph, pulling him back 18 years to a spring afternoon that had changed everything. Lauren had stood in the garden of the Ironvale estate, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant and glowing with a happiness Garrick hadn't seen in her since childhood. But there was something else in her silver-gray eyes that day, a terrible, beautiful resolve. "I've made my decision, Father," she had said quietly. "After Melissa is born, I'm going through with a ritual." The ritual. The words hung between them like a death sentence. To surrender immortality, to sever the power that had flowed through Iron Veil veins for millennia, was irreversible. She would age. She would weaken. She would die as all humans do. "You're carrying my granddaughter," Garrick had said, his voice strained. "She'll have our blood. Our legacy. Why would you?" "Exactly, because she'll have our blood." Lauren's hand moved in slow circles over her belly. "Daniel doesn't know what I really am, and he can never know. But more than that, I want Melissa to have a choice I never had. I want her to grow up in sunlight, going to normal schools, having normal friends. When she's older, when she's ready, you can tell her about the Iron Veil legacy. But her childhood should be human. You're asking me to watch you die." The words came out harsher than Garrick intended. "I'm asking you to let me live," Lauren countered. "Really live. To grow old with my husband. To be fully present for my daughter without hiding half of what I am." Months later, Garrick had stood in the shadows of the hospital room as Lauren held newborn Melissa for the first time. The baby had been perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and eyes that already gleamed with that telltale Iron Veil silver. The heritage was there, dormant but undeniable, flowing through her tiny veins. 2 weeks after that, Lauren had performed the ritual in the estate's oldest chamber. Garrick had watched as the silver faded from his daughter's eyes, turning to warm human brown. Watched as her skin lost its preternatural pallor. Watched as she became breakable. She had smiled at him through tears. Now Melissa can have a mother who takes her to the park in daylight. Garrick had established the trust fund immediately, $2 million to ensure that, even from a distance, even bound by the ancient laws that forbade too much involvement in human affairs, his granddaughter would never want for anything. Lauren had moved with Daniel to a modest house in the suburbs, and Garrick had kept his promise to stay away, visiting only occasionally, always careful not to disrupt the normal life his daughter had sacrificed everything to build. Then came the call on that Tuesday evening, 3 years after Melissa's birth. A car accident on a rain-slicked highway. Daniel's vehicle had veered off the road and down an embankment. Both he and Lauren died on impact, according to the police report. Lauren, who would have walked away from that crash without a scratch if she had kept her immortal strength. Lauren, who had chosen mortality for her daughter's sake and paid the ultimate price. Garrick had read the report with 5 centuries of suspicion sharpening his focus. Corroded brake lines, sudden weather changes, an unidentified vehicle leaving the scene. Everything about it felt wrong. But before he could investigate, Sophia Martinez had appeared at his estate, her face pale with grief, clutching guardianship documents. "I'm Daniel's sister. I'm all Melissa has left," Sophia had said, her voice breaking. "Lauren told me once that she wanted Melissa raised away from the darker parts of your world. Let me honor my brother's memory. Let me give her the normal childhood Lauren died trying to protect." The words had struck deep. Lauren had sacrificed her immortality for normalcy, for safety, for a human life for her daughter. So Garrick had signed the custody papers, had arranged for monthly transfers from the trust fund directly to Sophia's account, funds explicitly designated for Melissa's elite education, her health, her every need. Had stepped back into the shadows, believing he was honoring his daughter's final wish. He had told himself the distance was necessary, that money would be enough. Now, 18 years later, staring at the photograph of Melissa in a soup kitchen wearing donated rags, he finally understood the devastating truth. Lauren had given up immortality to protect their bloodline's future, and he had failed to safeguard the only thing she left behind. The shelter smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. Garrick moved through the entrance like a shadow given form, his black velvet coat drawing stares from the handful of residents scattered across the common room. A television mounted in the corner droned the evening news. Someone coughed wetly in the back hallway. Victor had given him the address an hour ago. Northside Emergency Housing. Capacity for 80. Currently sheltering 63, including one Melissa Martinez, who had checked in 6 months prior with nothing but the clothes on her back and a battered backpack. Garrick's eyes adjusted to the fluorescent lighting as he scanned the rows of metal bunk beds visible through the open dormitory door. His senses, dulled by decades of deliberate restraint, still carried enough preternatural sharpness to pick out individual heartbeats in the building. 74 people, staff and residents combined. One of those heartbeats called to him with an unmistakable pull. Iron Veil blood recognized Iron Veil blood, even after 18 years of separation. He found her in the women's dormitory, sitting on a lower bunk pushed against the far wall. Her dark hair hung in a loose braid over one shoulder, and she wore the same gray hoodie from the soup kitchen photograph, though it looked even more threadbare in person. The backpack Victor had mentioned sat clutched against her chest like a shield. She looked up as his footsteps approached, and Garrick felt something crack in his chest. Lauren's face. Not exactly. The shape of the jaw was different, softer, probably inherited from Daniel. But the eyes, even without their silver gleam, held that same fierce intelligence. The same stubborn set to her mouth. His granddaughter. Living in a room that housed 16 other women, sleeping on a cot with a mattress so thin he could see the metal frame through it. "Can I help you?" Her voice came out wary, defensive. She pulled the backpack tighter. Garrick realized he'd been staring. He also realized how he must look to her, a man in a coat worth more than everything in this building combined, platinum hair catching the harsh light, appearing in a women's shelter without warning or explanation. Melissa Martinez? He kept his voice gentle, though fury still simmered beneath the surface. Not at her. Never at her. Her eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "My name is Garrick Ironvale." He watched her face carefully for any flicker of recognition. There was none. "I believe we need to talk about your living situation." Something shifted in her expression, fear mixed with a bitter kind of resignation. "If this is about the shelter stay limits, I'm working on it. I've got job applications out. I just need a little more. This isn't about shelter regulations." Garrick pulled a folder from inside his coat, the same one Victor had compiled. Bank statements. Transfer records. 18 years of documentation. "This is about $2 million that was supposed to ensure you never spent a single night in a place like this." Melissa's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." He took a careful step closer, watching as she tensed like a cornered animal. It hurt something deep in him to see her so frightened. "Tell me, Melissa, what has your Aunt Sophia told you about your mother's family?" The backpack slipped slightly in her grip. "My mother didn't have family. Sophia said that she came from bad people. Dangerous people who didn't want me." "And you believed her?" "I was 3 when my parents died." Melissa's voice cracked. What else was I supposed to believe? The sound of heels on linoleum echoed from the hallway behind them. Garrick didn't need to turn around to know who had just entered the shelter. Victor had made the call 20 minutes ago, telling Sophia Martinez exactly where to find them. Sophia Martinez had not expected to find the shelter's common room occupied by a figure from her nightmares. She had come to deliver her monthly performance, the concerned aunt checking in on her troubled niece, reminding the staff what a burden poor Melissa had become, how she'd tried everything to help the girl, but some people just couldn't be saved. It was a routine she'd perfected over the past 6 months, ensuring that if anyone ever asked questions, they'd remember Sophia as the long-suffering family member who'd done her best. But the man standing beside Melissa's bunk bed made the practiced words die in her throat. Garrick Ironvale looked exactly as he had 15 years ago. Not a line on his pale face. Not a strand of gray in that platinum hair. The same unsettling stillness that had always made her skin crawl, like looking at a predator carved from marble. He shouldn't be here. He had never checked, never visited, never questioned the quarterly reports she'd sent through her lawyer, reports full of fabricated tuition payments and boarding school updates that he'd accepted without a single follow-up call. Step away from her. Sophia forced authority into her voice, though her hands trembled as she clutched her designer handbag. Right now, or I'm calling the police. Garrick turned to face her fully, and Sophia saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not anger. Anger would have been preferable. This was something ancient and patient and absolutely certain. "Hello, Sophia," he said quietly. "I believe we have some accounting to discuss. I don't know what you think you're doing, but Melissa is under my legal guardianship. She turned 18 4 months ago." Garrick's voice cut through her bluster like a blade. "Your guardianship ended the day she became an adult, which, coincidentally, was the same day you evicted her from your home and cut off all contact." Sophia's mouth opened, then closed. Behind Garrick, Melissa had gone very still, her eyes darting between them like she was watching a collision happen in slow motion. "That's not." She chose to leave. "I offered her a place, but she was ungrateful, difficult. You told the shelter staff she'd been a runaway for years." Garrick pulled a sheet of paper from his folder. "Your exact words to the intake coordinator were, 'I've tried everything, but my niece has addiction issues I can no longer enable.' Would you like to explain why you felt the need to lie about your own niece's character?" The blood drained from Sophia's face. "I was trying to help her get services. You were ensuring she'd be seen as unreliable, as a lost cause." Garrick took a step forward. "Tell me, Sophia, in the 18 years since I entrusted Melissa to your care, how much of the trust fund did you actually spend on her education?" Sophia's fingers tightened on her handbag. "I don't have to answer to you. I kept detailed records. Everything was documented." Ashford Academy. Garrick's voice remained dangerously calm. "The elite boarding school where Melissa has supposedly been enrolled for the past decade. Would you like to know what my investigators found when they visited the address?" Silence. "A parking lot," Garrick continued. "The school was demolished in 2016, 7 years ago. Yet I've been paying tuition to an account in your name every semester without fail. There were complications, transfers to other schools. $2 million, Sophia." Now the anger bled through, cold and lethal. $2 million transferred into accounts you controlled. Money designated explicitly for Melissa's care, her education, her future. And I find my granddaughter sleeping in a homeless shelter, wearing donated clothes. The word granddaughter hit the room like a thunderclap. Melissa made a small, choked sound. Sophia's face went from pale to gray. "That's impossible," Sophia whispered. "Lauren said you were. She never said." "Where's the money, Sophia?" Garrick held out the folder, and Sophia saw her entire life laid bare in those documents. Bank transfers, property purchases, the villa in Barcelona, the condo in Miami. Every luxury she'd bought with Melissa's inheritance while letting Daniel's daughter believe she had nothing. "Where," Garrick repeated, his voice dropping to something that barely sounded human, "is every cent of the $2 million I sent for my blood?" Melissa's voice came from behind them, small and brittle as cracked glass. "You're lying." Garrick turned to find his granddaughter standing now. The backpack dropped to the floor, her whole body rigid with something between terror and desperate hope. "Melissa," he started, but she cut him off. "Sophia told me the truth years ago. My mother was involved with dangerous people. Bad people who did something to my father, and when they both died, those same people wanted nothing to do with me." Her words came faster, like a recitation she'd repeated to herself 1,000 times. "She said I should be grateful she took me in at all, that anyone connected to my mother's side was." "Let me guess," Garrick said softly. "Cursed? Evil?" Demonic? Melissa's face crumpled. How did you? Because it's easier to steal from a child who thinks she has no one else in the world. Garrick's gaze shifted to Sophia, who had gone very still. Isn't that right, Sophia? Much simpler to keep Melissa isolated and afraid than risk her asking questions about her inheritance. I protected her, Sophia hissed. I kept her away from your unnatural. You locked her in a basement. The words came from Melissa, raw and shaking. She was staring at Sophia now with something breaking open in her expression. I was 7 years old, and you locked me in the basement for 3 days because I asked if I could see a picture of my mother. Garrick's hands clenched at his sides, the folder crinkling in his grip. You told me my mother was a demon who seduced my father, Melissa continued, her voice gaining strength even as tears tracked down her face. That the Ironvale family were monsters who cursed him to death because he tried to escape. You said if I ever tried to find them, they'd destroy me like they destroyed him. Your mother made choices, Sophia started. My mother loved my father. Melissa's voice cracked. I remember that much. I remember her singing to me. I remember her laugh. And you spent 15 years trying to make me forget, trying to make me believe she was something evil. She gave up everything human to be with him. Sophia spat, the mask finally slipping. Abandoned her own kind for my brother, and then got him killed with whatever darkness followed her. Yes, I told you the Ironvales were cursed. Because they are. Look at him. She gestured wildly at Garrick. He hasn't aged a day in 15 years. What kind of natural creature does that? The kind that would have protected Melissa with his life if you hadn't poisoned her against her own blood. Garrick's voice had gone deadly quiet. You didn't keep her in that basement to protect her from me, Sophia. You kept her there so she'd be too terrified to ever ask why her grandfather never came. Too broken to question why she had nothing when she should have had everything. Melissa wrapped her arms around herself, looking suddenly very young. And Garrick understood then that Sophia's theft wasn't just about money. It was about revenge against a brother who'd loved the wrong woman. And Melissa had paid the price for 15 years. Victor appeared in the dormitory doorway as if summoned, a slim tablet in his hands and 2 individuals in dark suits flanking him. The legal team Garrick kept on permanent retainer moved with the silent efficiency of people accustomed to dismantling lives on paper. Ms. Martinez, the woman on Victor's left said, her voice professionally neutral. My name is Catherine Yates, Senior Counsel for Ironvale Holdings. We've completed the forensic audit you requested, Mr. Ironvale. She handed Garrick the tablet, but he held it up so both Melissa and Sophia could see the screen. Let's start with the villa, Garrick said, scrolling to a photograph of a sprawling Mediterranean estate, white stone gleaming against impossibly blue water. Costa Brava, Spain. Purchased 8 years ago for 1.2 million euros. The down payment came from an account funded by Melissa's trust on September 15th, the same day I transferred her annual education allowance. Sophia's face had gone ashen, but she said nothing. Then there's the Miami condo, Garrick continued, swiping to another image. Oceanfront. 2 bedrooms, marble, everything. Purchased 6 years ago. The mortgage payments, still being made, I notice, come from a separate account also fed by the trust fund. Melissa stared at the screen like it was written in a language she didn't understand. Those places are worth approximately $2.3 million combined, Catherine Yates supplied. Though Sophia has also taken out substantial loans against both properties. The current total debt is roughly $890,000. You gambled with my granddaughter's future, Garrick said, his voice like ice over steel. And you lost. I managed the money responsibly, Sophia said, but her voice had lost its conviction. Real estate is an investment. I was growing her inheritance. You were growing your own portfolio. Victor tapped the tablet, pulling up a spreadsheet that made Melissa's eyes widen. These are the actual expenses claimed for Melissa's care over 18 years. School tuition to a non-existent academy, $470,000. Medical expenses for treatments she never received, $83,000. Private tutoring that never happened, $125,000. Summer enrichment programs at camps that have no record of her attendance, $97,000. Show her the cars, Garrick said quietly. Another swipe. A Mercedes. A Range Rover. A vintage Porsche. All registered to Sophia, Catherine Yates continued. All purchased with funds transferred within days of deposits from the Iron Veil Trust. There's also approximately $340,000 in luxury goods, jewelry, designer clothing, art pieces, all traced back to credit cards paid off using Melissa's money. Melissa had gone very pale. While I was sleeping in your basement, you were buying sports cars. You were clothed and fed, Sophia shot back, defensive now. You had a roof over your head.
I didn't owe you.
$2 million, Garrick interrupted. You owed her exactly $2 million. Money that was never yours. Money designated for her care, her education, her future. And instead of giving my granddaughter the life her mother died, hoping she'd have, you gave her lies while you lived like royalty on her inheritance. Victor pulled out a final document, this one paper. We've also identified 17 separate instances of forged documentation, school reports, medical records, even photographs you claimed were of Melissa at various academic achievements. All fabricated. Sophia's designer handbag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a heavy thud. That's fraud, Catherine Yates said simply. And embezzlement. We'll be filing charges within the hour. The police arrived within 15 minutes, but by then, Garrick had already made 7 phone calls that would dismantle Sophia's life more thoroughly than any court sentence ever could. The first call went to his contact at the Spanish property registry. By the time the officers were taking Sophia's statement in the shelter's cramped office, the villa in Costa Brava had been flagged for immediate seizure pending investigation of fraudulent purchase. The locks would be changed by morning. The second and third calls targeted her financial infrastructure. Credit lines frozen. Bank accounts locked pending audit. The Range Rover she'd driven to the shelter tonight would be towed within the hour, along with the Mercedes and Porsche currently sitting in her garage across town. Garrick watched through the office window as Sophia gestured frantically, her voice rising in pitch as she tried to explain to the detective that there had been a misunderstanding, that the money had been legitimately hers to manage, that Garrick Ironvale was a dangerous man with unnatural influence who couldn't be trusted. The detective, a weathered woman in her 50s, simply nodded and took notes. Mr. Ironvale, Catherine Yates approached with another tablet. The Miami Property Management has confirmed cooperation. They're beginning eviction proceedings for the tenants Sophia placed there. The rental income she's been collecting will be redirected to a recovery account for Melissa. Garrick nodded, making his fourth call. This one went to the board of the Westbridge Country Club, where Sophia had been a member for 6 years, membership paid for, naturally, with Melissa's money. He spoke quietly, precisely, and by the time he ended the call, Sophia's name had been struck from their registry. The same would happen at the Yacht Club, the Art Foundation, and every other institution where she bought prestige with stolen funds. Melissa stood beside him, silent and pale, watching her aunt's world collapse in real time. She'd barely spoken since the legal team arrived, as if the enormity of what had been stolen from her was still too large to process. She's going to jail? Melissa's voice came out small. Yes, Garrick said simply. For a very long time, if justice is served properly. And the money?
Can you get it back?
Not all of it. She's spent nearly $1.4 million between the properties, cars, and lifestyle expenses. But the assets we can liquidate will be returned to you, along with appropriate damages. He glanced at Catherine, who nodded confirmation. Conservative estimate, we'll recover approximately $1.2 million in liquidated assets, Catherine said. Plus we're pursuing civil damages for the remainder. You'll never have to sleep in a place like this again, Melissa. Through the window, Garrick watched as the detective placed handcuffs on Sophia's wrists. Her face had gone blotchy with tears, mascara tracking down her cheeks as she pleaded with the officers. She looked nothing like the composed woman who'd walked into the shelter 30 minutes ago, designer coat perfectly pressed, ready to deliver another performance of charitable concern. But Garrick's fifth call had been to the district attorney, someone who owed the Ironvale family more favors than she could count. The charges would stick. The prosecution would be airtight. His sixth call went to a journalist at the city's largest newspaper. By tomorrow morning, Sophia's arrest would be front-page news. Society woman arrested for embezzling niece's $2 million trust fund. The story would include photographs of the villa, the cars, and a particularly damning image of the shelter where Melissa had been living. Every circle Sophia had fought to enter with Melissa's stolen money would close against her permanently. The seventh call had been the most satisfying. Garrick's contact at Immigration Services in Spain was already reviewing Sophia's visa status. The villa hadn't just been purchased fraudulently, she'd obtained residency through financial misrepresentation. That carried its own set of consequences, including potential extradition issues that would complicate any attempt to flee. Mr. Ironvale? One of the officers approached, a younger man with cautious eyes. We'll need Ms. Martinez to come to the station for her formal statement. And we'd like one from you as well, regarding the trust fund establishment. Of course. My legal team will coordinate everything you need. Garrick handed the officer Catherine's card. We have 18 years of documentation ready for your review. Through the window, Sophia was being led toward the police car, her wrists bound behind her back. She turned at the last moment, her eyes finding Melissa through the glass. There was no remorse in that gaze, only fury at being caught. Melissa didn't look away. She watched as her aunt was placed in the back of the patrol car, watched as the vehicle pulled away from the shelter with its lights flashing red and blue against the winter darkness. She never loved me, did she? Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. Garrick chose his words carefully. She loved what your existence allowed her to take. That's not the same thing. My mother loved me. Your mother loved you more than her own immortality, Garrick said quietly. Everything she gave up, so you could have the life Sophia stole from you. Melissa finally turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time since he'd revealed who he was. What happens now? Garrick met his granddaughter's eyes, seeing Lauren's strength beneath the exhaustion and fear. Now, he said, I take you home. The Ironvale estate rose from the landscape like something out of a forgotten era, all stone and iron gates and windows that gleamed like watchful eyes in the pre-dawn darkness. Melissa pressed her face against the car window as Victor's vehicle wound up the long driveway, her backpack clutched in her lap like she still didn't quite believe she was allowed to be here. Garrick watched her take in the ancestral home, the place her mother had grown up, had walked away from, had died trying to give Melissa the freedom to choose. It's huge, Melissa whispered. It's yours, Garrick replied. As much as it's mine. Ironvale blood has lived within these walls for 5 centuries. The car stopped at the main entrance, where staff waited to receive them. But Garrick dismissed them with a subtle gesture. This moment needed to be private, needed to be just the two of them crossing this threshold together. He led Melissa through halls lined with portraits and tapestries, watching as she stared at faces that shared her features, the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw, the defiant tilt of her chin that seemed to run in their bloodline like silver through stone. Is that her? Melissa stopped in front of a portrait near the grand staircase. A young woman with dark hair and eyes that gleamed with subtle silver light, wearing a dress from another century, but smiling with unmistakable warmth. Your great-great-grandmother, Garrick said. Elena Ironvale. She lived to be 417 years old. Melissa's breath caught. 400. We aged differently. Or we did, before your mother made her choice. He guided her up the stairs, toward the eastern wing where Lauren's chambers had been preserved exactly as she'd left them. Sophia told you we were cursed. She told you your mother was something evil. She said Mom seduced my father with dark magic, that the Ironvale family killed him for trying to escape. Garrick opened the door to Lauren's room, and Melissa stepped inside like she was entering a shrine. The space still held traces of his daughter, books on the shelves, a hairbrush on the vanity, photographs covering one entire wall. Photographs of Lauren and Daniel. Lauren pregnant, glowing with happiness. Lauren holding newborn Melissa, her eyes brown instead of silver, but still radiant with joy. Your mother gave up her immortality by choice, Garrick said quietly. There was no seduction, no curse, no dark magic. She fell in love with a good man who taught literature to high school students and made her laugh. And when she became pregnant with you, she made the hardest decision of her life. He picked up a leather journal from the bedside table, one he'd read 1,000 times in the years since Lauren's death. She wrote this the week before you were born. Would you like to hear it? Melissa nodded, her eyes already bright with tears. Garrick opened to the marked page, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. I'm going through with the ritual next month. Father thinks I'm giving up everything, throwing away centuries of life for a mortal span of decades. But he doesn't understand. I'm not giving up anything. I'm gaining everything that matters. I'm choosing to grow old with Daniel, choosing to take Melissa to the park in sunlight, choosing to be fully present for every moment of her childhood without hiding what I am. She'll have vampire blood, Father's legacy running through her veins. But she'll also have a choice I never had, the choice to live in both worlds or neither, or something entirely new. That's not a curse. That's the greatest gift I can give her. Melissa's hand trembled as she reached for the journal. She wanted me to have a choice. She wanted you to have everything, Garrick said. And Sophia took that from you. Took your inheritance, took your mother's memory, took the truth about who you are and replaced it with lies designed to keep you small and afraid. What am I? Melissa's voice cracked. If Mom gave up being vampire and Dad was human, what does that make me? You're Ironvale, Garrick said simply. The heritage doesn't disappear just because your mother chose mortality. It sleeps in your blood, dormant but present. You won't live 400 years like Elena, but you're stronger than normal humans, heal faster, sense things others can't. And more importantly, he gestured to the room, to the portraits, to the vast estate beyond. You're the heir to 5 centuries of legacy. Not cursed, not demonic, powerful. Melissa looked down at the journal, at her mother's handwriting flowing across the page. Sophia said I should be ashamed of this, she whispered. Sophia said a lot of things that kept you from knowing your worth. Garrick placed a hand on her shoulder, careful and gentle. Being different isn't something to fear, Melissa. It's something to claim. 6 months had changed everything. Melissa stood on the balcony of the Ironvale Foundation's headquarters, watching the sun set over the city's skyline. The building wasn't as tall as some of the surrounding towers, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was what happened inside. The legal aid clinic on the 3rd floor, the emergency housing assistance program on the 4th, the therapy services that ran from dawn until well past dark. What mattered were the children who no longer had to sleep in shelters because someone in their family had chosen greed over love. The Patterson case settled this morning, Catherine Yates said, stepping onto the balcony with a folder in hand. She transitioned from Ironvale Holdings to become the Foundation's chief legal counsel, and she wore the role like armor. The grandfather was hiding the trust fund in offshore accounts. We recovered $1.8 million. The kids will be placed with their maternal aunt. We verified she's clean. Melissa took the folder, scanning the details with practiced efficiency. 6 months ago, terms like offshore accounts and trust fund administration would have been foreign language. Now they were the vocabulary of justice. That's the 9th case this quarter, she said. We're making a difference. You're making a difference, Catherine corrected. This was your vision. It had started small, just Melissa and the $1.2 million recovered from Sophia's liquidated assets, sitting in Garrick's study trying to figure out what to do with money that felt too heavy with grief and anger to simply spend on herself. She'd thought about the other girls in the shelter, the ones with stories that echoed her own. Families that had stolen from them, systems that had failed them, futures that had been sold off piece by people who were supposed to protect them. I want to make sure no one else has to wait 18 years for someone to notice, she told Garrick that night. He'd looked at her with something like pride and said, then let's build something that makes noticing impossible to avoid. The Iron Veil Foundation had launched 3 months later, funded by Melissa's recovered inheritance and a substantial contribution from Garrick's personal holdings. They'd hired investigators, lawyers, social workers, people who knew how to find the children falling through the cracks and pull them back before they disappeared entirely. In 6 months, they'd identified 43 cases of family financial abuse. They'd recovered over $12 million in stolen funds. They'd placed 67 children in safe homes. And Melissa had found something she'd never expected to find in the wreckage of Sophia's betrayal: purpose. The city council wants to meet with you next week, Catherine continued. They're interested in partnering on a larger initiative. Apparently, you've made quite an impression. Melissa smiled slightly. I'm just doing what my mother would have wanted. Your mother would be incredibly proud. The voice came from behind them, Garrick, emerging from the building with that same timeless elegance that no longer unsettled Melissa. She'd grown accustomed to the way he moved, the way other people unconsciously deferred to him, the subtle reminder that her grandfather was something more than human. She'd also grown accustomed to the fact that she was something more than human too. Catherine excused herself tactfully, leaving grandfather and granddaughter alone on the balcony as twilight deepened over the city. I've been thinking about the expansion, Melissa said, leaning against the railing. If we're going to scale nationally, we'll need more than just financial backing. We'll need political influence. The Iron Veil name carries considerable weight in certain circles, Garrick said carefully. I can open doors. But this is your foundation, Melissa. Your legacy. I won't overshadow it. I'm not asking you to overshadow anything. She turned to face him fully. I'm asking you to teach me how to use the power I inherited. Not just the money. The real power. The kind that makes people listen when you speak. Something shifted in Garrick's expression, satisfaction mixed with a fierce, protective pride. You're ready for that? 6 months ago, I was sleeping on a metal cot and eating from food banks. Now I'm running a foundation that's changing lives. Melissa's voice steadied. Sophia spent 18 years trying to convince me I was nothing, that I came from nothing, that I deserved nothing. But she was wrong about all of it. She was, Garrick agreed quietly. I come from 5 centuries of legacy. I carry Iron Veil blood. And I'm not going to waste another day pretending to be smaller than I am just because it makes other people comfortable. She looked out over the city, at the lights beginning to glow in windows across the skyline. This foundation is just the beginning. I want to build something that outlasts me. Something that makes sure no child ever has to wonder if they matter. Garrick moved to stand beside her, and for a moment they simply watched the city together. Vampire King and his granddaughter, both of them shaped by loss but refusing to be defined by it. Your mother gave up immortality, so you could choose your own path, Garrick said finally. She wanted you to have the freedom to be anything you wanted. What do you want to be, Melissa? Melissa thought about the girls in the shelter who'd looked at her with hollow eyes. Thought about the families torn apart by greed. Thought about all the children still waiting for someone to notice they were drowning. I want to be the person who shows up, she said. The person who asks the hard questions. The person who doesn't let people disappear just because it's easier than fighting for them. She turned to Garrick, and in the fading light, Her eyes caught the gleam of silver that had been slowly returning over the past months, her dormant Iron Veil heritage waking up as she stepped into her power. I want to be worthy of the legacy Mom died protecting. Garrick's hand rested on her shoulder, solid and certain. You already are. But if you want to learn how to wield the full weight of the Iron Veil name. His smile was slight but genuine. Then let's begin your real education. Below them, the city sprawled in all its complicated beauty, broken and brilliant, cruel and kind, full of people who needed someone to fight for them. And standing on that balcony, finally understanding who she was and what she carried, Melissa Ironveil was ready to fight. If Melissa's journey from a shelter floor to reclaiming her legacy moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe so you never miss stories like this and share this video. Thanks for watching.